Splatoon is the hit third-person shooter game developed by Nintendo. Known for its vibrant colors, amazing music, and simple but effective game mechanics, we follow a young squid of our choosing as we enter the colorful world of Ingopolis. Here, our objective is simple: level up, get fresh gear, and ink our opponents. The first Splatoon title was released on May 28th of 2015 on the Wii U. Since then, 2 more titles have dropped: Splatoon 2 on July 21st, 2017, and its DLC Octo expansion, released June 13th, 2018, and Splatoon 3 on September 9th, 2022, both released on the Switch. These games, on the surface, offer a great and refreshing spin on the modern AAA shooter. Yet, beneath the bright colors of ink and teenage squid exploitation, we begin to unravel a 100-year-old story of war, betrayal, and discrimination. This is Splatoon and War, Ink and Bombs, and how Splatoon mirrors the story of oppressed and oppressive US states through militarism, racism, and war. Wait, how does this translate to the horrors of war? Is probably what you might be asking yourself. Well, attentive viewer, to understand how point A gets to point B, we first have to explain what is Splatoon. Part 1. Splatoon's story. Before we start this deep dive, I'm going to be color-coding screenshots and information to let you guys understand what the timeline is. So depending on the borders or like the color around the screenshot, it'll tell you what game it's from. So this is the colors for the first game, this is the colors for the second game, and this is the colors for the third game, as well as the second game's DLC. Alright, that's all. Well, Splatoon's story starts 12,000 years in the past with the end of human civilization. Human civilization has ended because of extended conflict between continents, war, global warming, and rising tide.
Hi guys, post-editing Monsi here. I wanted to go more in detail about those events that I just named. I realized that I just kind of said it and didn't really expand on it, so I'm going to do that right now. So basically, 10,000 years ago, the humans on Earth were messing up the world because of global warming, and so rising tide starts happening. And because of that rising tide, a lot of conflict and tension starts happening around the world, which then leads into a ginormous war, which then ends up turning into a nuclear war because a nuclear missile goes and accidentally hits Antarctica, which then hits the ice caps, which then causes the end of human civilization as we know it because everybody dies. So yeah, we can infer that this is meant to be kind of a commentary on the current state of the world, especially with a lot of environment affairs and the current pressing issue of global warming. Because of the topic of this video, I'm going to be relating it back to America, since America is not very good at talking about global warming or addressing global warming. So this is kind of like a commentary about how the world could turn out if we keep going down this route, how everybody could die and things like that. But yeah, I just wanted to go more into detail with that because I just didn't do that when I was recording this the first time. Okay, thank you. Now back to the video.
The general human population is dead, with small groups living and seeking refuge in a new, brutal, and changing world. This information is first mentioned in the first Splatoon art book and then further deepened by the third game's story mode, After Alterna, and its story logs. After Alterna is a volcanic dome, where the last humans reside in to try and rebuild civilization. This works for a short time. Panels are built in the dome to mimic day-night cycles, humans engineer spaceships and crops to try and thrive, and all is well for a bit, until a young group of humans tries to break out of the dome via spaceship. A giant hole is broken through the dome, and eventually the humans in the dome and in the spaceship die out. Eventually, the hopes and dreams from the panels built from crystals, as well as nuclear radiation, caused sea life to evolve. 12,000 years pass, and the first inkfish, inklings, emerge from waters to build their own traditions through the ancient art of turf war. Quick side pivot. We're going to be having a lot of these. What's a turf war? Okay, so 2 teams of 4 ink the ground and try to get the most ink coverage to win. That's a turf war. Okay, great, got that? Back to the video.
Aside from being an actual gameplay element, turf wars actually hold cultural significance to Inklings, which is shown in this sunken scroll right here.
Inklings are the primary and most closely evolved species to humans. They have 2 arms and legs, tentacles, and can switch between a human form and a squid form. They are the dominant and most privileged species in the game. During the same time that squids were evolving, octopi were also making their way up the evolutionary ladder. Octolings and octarians are the second most important species in Splatoon. Similarly to Inklings, they have 2 arms and legs, tentacles, and can switch between a human form and octopus form. Octolings do have one major difference, aside from appearance. All octolings come from a baby form known as octarians, though not every octarian becomes an octoling. Some octarians evolved into octolings, and some do not. Around 100 years before the main events of the first game, octolings and inklings used to share land and live together. Yet, this all changed when climate change attacked. Rising sea levels caused land disputes over remaining territory. Wait. You might be saying right now, they're sea animals, why can't they just go back to the water? Well, funny thing, when Inklings and Octolings evolved, they became incredibly sensitive to water, and lost their abilities to live in the sea, so they die if they touch water now. Inklings and Octolings are the only species that is like this, from what I've researched, as the other sea life, like salmonoids and jellyfish, can exist in water just fine. Anyways, back to the main point. The rising tension over how 2 species would be able to sustain their population and people caused disputes over land from 2 leaders, DJ Octavio and Craig Cuttlefish. Because of this, a giant war broke out called the Great Turf War. And though the Octolings won the first major dispute, the Inklings ultimately got the upper hand in the end and forced the Octoling people to live underground. These underground conditions were bad, and caused the Octarian and Octoling population to fight for power and steal resources above land. Led by DJ Octavio once again, escapades to steal the major power source of Inkopolis, known as the giant Zapfish, took place, and so our story mode campaign begins. Racial tensions between the 2 species is also very apparent. As seen in the second game's DLC,
Captain Cuttlefish has multiple lines. I'll put them up here on screen, but he refers to not seeing Octolings/Octarians by species, as well as calling Marina, Ida, and Octoling very articulated.
And Octolings are seen immigrating from Octo Valley, their hometowns, and Deep Metro Station, and integrating into Inkling society. We get lines on this as well, but Octolings are not referred to as Octolings. Instead, they are referred to as Inklings with funky hairstyles. So, the truth is yet to come out until they are accepted in the third game. Though discrimination is still seen, once again, by Captain Cuttlefish, most of the Octoling population is integrating well, learning Inkling and being accepted into society. Now, you may be asking, well, that's neat and all, but how does this fictional story of squids and octopi hating each other translate to actual real-world struggles in America? Well, for that, we have to start establishing parallels between real-world events and fictional ones. Hence, Part 2, Parallels. For the sake of this video not being longer than it has to be, I'm going to split this section into 3 parts and show evidence in game as well as in real life to establish connections. These 3 parts are going to be military, society, and consumerism. And with these 3 parts, we'll show how the world of Inkopolis isn't as happy as it seems. Military seems to be the most obvious and heaviest point with evidence in game. As previously established, Inklings and Octolings had a big ol' scuttle, which ended in the banishing of an entire population of people out of a shared homeland. This, in and of itself, mirrors a lot of American wars or military occupations, the most famous of these being the treatment of indigenous people in the United States, being forced from their homelands, ravaged, and killed. Yet a more modern example with more parallels would be World War II with America versus Japan.
In this sunken scroll right here depicting Captain Cuttlefish and DJ Octavio, we can also see there's a lot of Japanese ties and influence to DJ Octavio as he's wearing a traditional kimono looking outfit, and here Captain Cuttlefish has more of a traditional American war outfit with badges and a cap, which pushes the idea of this Western versus Eastern influence.
Both powers at the time had a lot of military power, and though the events play out differently since this is fiction and reality, both Inklings and Octolings have a large military, and turf war, which can be seen as a militaristic act, can mirror the 2 nations' constant wars and surges for power.
When it comes to turf wars being seen as a militarized act, that doesn't mean it was always a militarized act. As seen 2,000 years ago, it was a cultural thing that Inklings did for fun. But with the new coming of the Great Turf War, it can be seen as memorizing it in some occasions. An example of this is in the Splatfest Squids vs. Octopi, where squids and octopi are pit against each other. In the Splatfest, historical ties are brought up, and we see our main octopi idol, Marina, become very uncomfortable with the subject. This turf war in specific is definitely seen to have political ties in the world of Splatoon, not to mention that it's literally a race war. When it comes to actual turf wars in real life, it's defined as two people fighting over land, so obviously not only does that mirror the Great Turf War, but it also mirrors the in-game play element of what a turf war is. Fun fact. Back to the video.
Giant weapons like fighter jets and hydrogen bombs are also seen to be mirrored in the world of Splatoon through their own active artillery. Octolings had a large array of powerful weapons, as well did Inklings. And Octolings are much more militarized as a means of survival, yet they are also seen to be much more poor than Inklings, with examples of lack of power. This also mirrors the effects that colonized countries go through when occupied or taken over. Examples of this with American ties include Cuba and Puerto Rico, as well as the other US territories. These colonized and occupied countries suffer a lot economically. With Puerto Rico, the Jones Act had a heavy halt in its economy, and with Cuba, US embargoes have made it hard for trade to flourish if it wasn't under strict American regulations.
Though the Inklings of Splatoon haven't put any sanctions on the Octoling people from what I know of, there are ties in game showing relations between Octolings/Octarians and Salmonoids and hopes to get resources and powers, since Octolings and Octarians still suffer greatly from the Great Turf War. Salmonoids are constantly getting their power eggs stolen, and so in a way of defending both themselves and getting technology, they've made a pact with Octarians. Octarians give their technology to Salmonoids, while Salmonoids give their power in the form of power eggs to keep the electricity running in Octo Valley. These alliances made by oppressed groups to defend themselves from powerful groups is not uncommon to see in real life. Going back to Cuba, an example of this can be seen with Fidel Castro and his alliance to communism and his ask for Russian aid.
The consequences of the ending of the war also had an insanely large social effect on racial tensions, which can also be seen in Splatoon, which leads us to our second point of society. As already stated, Octolings go through a large array of discrimination, being usually painted as violent or hurtful. In the second scrolls of Splatoon 1, we see propaganda done by both sides describing the enemy as dangerous. This mirrors a lot of racial tensions that was incredibly prominent during and after World War II, with both anti-Japanese and anti-American flyers, art, and caricatures. Multiple racial or speciesist comments are done by multiple characters in the series, and there is also a general we get them before they get us mindset, and a lot of the story mode, as Octolings and Octarians are the main enemies of the story mode. Societal opinions don't shift until we get to play as Octolings in the second game's DLC, and even then, the integration of Octolings into Inkling society is slow and hushed, with people not understanding that the newcomer is actually not Inklings, and in fact their own race. Yet, to adapt and be safe, Octolings assimilate by learning language and participating in culture. The main reason for why a lot of these Octolings are fleeing for a better and more promising life on the surface, the largest example of this is with Marina Ida, one of the main idols of Splatoon 2. She's a young Octoling who broke out of her trance of serving the military after being exposed to Inkling music. With that drive, she went to the surface and began a new life away from military, poverty, and war with her partner in music, Pearl Hoizuki. These struggles are very reminiscent of a lot of immigrant and anti-war stories of people fleeing drafts or war to escape death or find better places for their families. As a child of an immigrant myself, I find myself empathizing a lot with the Octoling experience of trying to find a place of belonging in a world that isn't made for you. And when it comes to historical examples with American ties, the Vietnam War and the stories of the Khmer Rouge are both events that come to mind. Both conflicts had American influence in some way, and both had members of communities fleeing for a better place,
as well as having to learn American culture and language to survive and blend in.
This leads to our last and final point: consumerism! One of the main and pivotal gameplay points in Splatoon 3's game is your freshness. Your freshness is dependent on your in-game level, and when you start the game you have to get to a certain level before you're even allowed to shop in stores for clothes, weapons, and decorations. About a dozen or so in-game brands exist to let you characterize your character, and even more dozens of weapons exist to let yourself choose whatever weapon kit and combat style is best suited for you. As Americans, we live in a consumer market. The top fashion brands, best cars, best shoes, we desire them to fit in and to continue to follow trends at hand. Though Splatoon takes this to a different level if you aren't up to the fresh code, it's apparent that America has a hive mind with trends at hand. Youth can find themselves divided on what is deemed socially acceptable or not, and many kids find themselves suffering from bully culture because of this. Yet why does bringing any of this up matter? Well, that's where we get to the takeaway. Point of this video, aside from being able to talk about my favorite game franchise for like 20 minutes, is to show how much Splatoon mirrors America in more ways than one, and how digestible video games make hard topics like this. These topics are finding themselves seeping more and more into video game spaces as ways of protest and education. If one can be taught the nuances of this information in a respectful way through engaging platforms, it can make tackling hard issues like this more understandable for youth, as well as sparking deep conversation regarding writing, world building, race, and war. And so, through this video, I hope you can try to see the importance of media in portraying deep and almost taboo and macabre topics in a way that can be shown through all. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.